All right, buckle up because this is probably going to be a pretty long one. I could have broken this down into a couple of slides, but well, I didn't. Wake of the Battle of Actium. Augustus comes to power, and he would rule for the next 45 years until his death in 14 AD. So think about all the important stuff that is going on when Augustus is around and the stuff that he is going to set in motion, especially when it comes to things of a religious nature that we'll tease out a bit more next class. Although his rise to power is always a little suspect because, well, he tries to present himself as somebody who is part of a Republican government, but he is also the heir of Caesar, who was very clearly a despot and who had been killed by the senators. He is quite successful in overhauling and reforming almost every single Roman institution. And he helps establish the Roman Empire on a much more rational basis. The reforms he institutes tend to last for the next 200 years or so. And this is probably the most creative period of the Roman Empire as well. So let's go through some of this and we'll digress in a few ways. 13th of January, 27 BC, Octavian comes before the Roman Senate. He lays down his supreme powers, and it's at this point that the Senate, packed with a lot of new senators that he has put in power, basically do what I talked about last class and say, oh no, you can't leave, and instead reward him with a new title. He now takes the name Augustus Caesar, and along with that, he takes the title of Divi Filius Augustus, the divine son Augustus. And this goes hand in hand with an attempt to reform the Roman religious system as well. So up until this point, Rome had a pantheon of gods that we introduced a little bit, but they had also co-opted all sorts of different gods from people they have conquered. And in many places, societies that Romans had come in contact with were comfortable with worshiping either living people or people who had been recently deceased. And one of the things that Augustus does is he sets up what's called an imperial cult, basically a religion, and this cult is to Julius Caesar. So now Caesar himself becomes linked to godlike status, and Augustus, by virtue of being his adopted son, becomes son of God. So now he's strengthening his position of power through religious means as well. One of the articles that deals with this very well and shows all the different ways that Augustus presents himself as somebody who is both divine but also somebody who's done great things for Rome is that Res Gestae, the deeds of the deified Augustus, which talks about all the great things he's done for the empire and which he sets up throughout the empire in Italy and Asia Minor and Africa, all as reminders of what he has done. By this point, he has purged the Senate of its more dubious members. It had been about 1,000, and he actually reduces it to 800 and then fills it again, which means that these men are solid supporters of Augustus. They've been picked by him. And with that, and with these moves, he proclaims that he has restored the Republic. So he says, our past 100 years, there's been this devolution, things have gone awry, but now I've brought the Senate back, I've brought the Republic back, and he says, you know what, let's let the Senate choose here. Do we still need me to rule for a little bit, or should I go ahead and step down? And resoundingly, the Senate votes to allow him to govern for another 10 years, which he, in reality, very gladly accepts, but on the surface seems to do so very hesitantly. So despite all the pomp and circumstance and suggested reticence, it's clear that he has done this so that he can take control of the entire Roman state. The Senate actually takes an oath of allegiance to him as emperor or imperator. And in 23 BC, he takes on a new role. He gets granted the authority of tribune. So that means that not only is he in charge of the Senate who has voted allegiance to him, he also has power of tribune in charge of the assembly, has the ultimate veto power, and has the ability to deal directly with the people themselves. So let's talk a little bit about his reforms, which, along with his really long life and long reign, contribute to the idea of something that he is more than human. He is a hero to a lot of Romans, and Son of God or God himself is kind of up for debate a little bit. Okay, so let's think about these reforms kind of broadly. He compromises between inherited traditions and changes the economic, political, and social reality of Rome in a whole variety of ways. In other words, what he does is he really effectively mixes old and new, which is perhaps a link to Hellenistic ideas, but certainly a very typically Roman ideal. And these reforms certainly save Rome, but also create a lot of underlying problems. So let's look at these reforms in the context of the problems that he faces. And he does these in positions of consul, as tribune. He also makes himself the chief priest of the Roman religion. He has the title princeps, which means first citizen. We talked about that a little bit already. He also takes on the title of pater patri, the father of the country. So he's the supreme ruler and has supreme authority. So 4 problems. Number 1, the northern frontiers, the areas beyond Rome, on the other side of the Alps. If you go back to that map and kind of see where we're talking about, in Gaul, in what would be modern-day Austria and Germany and France and Belgium. Those northern frontiers are subject to all sorts of attacks from groups of people, all lumped together to be called Germans, or Aleman would be another term that the Romans would have used for them. Your Jeopardy knowledge for the day, if you know anything about Spanish, Spaniards don't call Germans Germans, they call them Alemanni. That's where this comes from. So it has to secure the northern borders against attack, and also has to deal with civil war type problems within the militaries that date back to the rise of the generals and different armies being loyal to different generals and fighting each other. Number 1. Number 2, the army itself, because of those things instituted by Marius and Sulla, had become way too large, way too unmanageable. They were basically state within a state. He's got to control the army. So number 2, control the army. Number 3, people are poor. People are struggling. The urban poor, the small farmers, they're struggling. They need to be helped in some way. And number 4, he's got to work with the senators in some way, and he's got to gain confidence from them. The government has to promote confidence among that senatorial class that is going to be needed for his rule. So again, the 4 of them: secure the frontiers and make sure that both external wars and civil wars are avoided. 2, control the military. 3, keep the people happy, especially poor farmers and poor urban dwellers. Number 4, appease the Senate. Well, he approaches this in a variety of ways, but probably he does them best by addressing how he's going to handle things in the provinces. So first thing he does is he consolidates his frontiers. And again, maybe going back to that YouTube video would help you out here. He extends the northern frontiers to the Rhine and the Danube rivers, but no further. Natural borders, doesn't attempt to cross them, sets up forts there. These borders are going to remain intact for quite a while. He reduces the size of the army within Italy, and anybody that is kind of left over, he sends out to the backwaters, stations them at those frontier outposts where they're out of the way, where they're dealing with barbarians, where they aren't a problem to Rome. He basically incentivizes retirement for soldiers. He has the state provide a cash payment for anyone who has served more than 20 years, and in doing so, he encourages a lot of retirement, but he also secures their loyalty to the state rather than to specific generals. The Roman army as a whole is taken out of the city of Rome because we've seen that they had played a pretty decent role in shifting alliances and supporting specific generals. So this way, without an army in Rome, they aren't meddling in civic affairs. And in their place, he creates something that is going to have some very long-term importance, the Praetorian Guard. I just realized that I don't have that on the term sheet, but it will be there when you see this. That is pretty much an elite corps of 9,000 troops. Their specific goal is to defend Caesar Augustus. They're stationed in Rome. They are Italian only, so no foreigners. They receive higher pay than legion soldiers, and their loyalty is going to be to Augustus himself. And they're essentially his personal bodyguard. We'll see in upcoming lectures how they become way more than that in the long run. And what's called the home provinces, the provinces around the city of Rome, mainly within the Italian peninsula. He says, you know what, senators, why don't you control here? These are the areas that your families come from. These are the areas that you know. And so this makes the Senate feel like they still have power, even though they're losing it really quickly. So these reforms stabilize the economy. They make the Mediterranean basin basically self-sufficient, but there are also some problems with it. Number one, economically, the system is based on lots of areas that are mutually independent. Not independent, interdependent. They're connected to each other, and that means that if a province falls to foreign attack or slips away, that can create problems within Rome itself. Secondly, and we've already hit on this a little bit, there's a system of slave labor that is the basis of the Roman Empire, and this is already showing signs of deterioration. Slaves don't want to work. The number of slaves is reduced because you can only go and conquer so many places and bring slaves in. There have been rebellions, like we saw with Spartacus. Lots of slave families have won their freedom through a process known as manumission. So that means that lots of manpower from slave labor is drained off of farms. Okay, so in general, kind of summarizing this without going into too much detail, even though you've been riding with me here for 12 minutes almost, this system works pretty well. Lasts for another 200 years. It provides a material and political base that his successors can work off of. And this ushers in the age of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. So let's use that as a jumping off point into a bit of comparison on the next slide between kind of Roman and Greek ideals.